Hello and welcome back to the TradeNeon software channel. And with that, also welcome back to our market analysis video series where we have a look at a market that is currently fundamentally interesting and analyze it within Futures Insights. If you don't know me yet, my name is Simon Reichert. I'm part of the TradeNeon Academy team, and for this video I prepared the ZM future, which is the future for soybean meal traded at the CBOT. This is a future that we covered a while ago on the German channel, where we also do the market analysis video series, but it now is even more fundamentally interesting and extreme, which is why I would like to address it again in another video. But before we head into analyzing within Futures Insights, please be aware that this video shall not serve as investment advice or intermediation, and that trading in derivatives or securities in general involves significant risk. But with this out of the way, let's promptly head into our chosen market, which again is the soybean meal future. And we start up with our dry powders for the managed money side, which are our large speculators. And immediately we see a quite convenient picture, because what we see is that the long open interest is very minimal. So we see that this is towards the lower left side, while the short open interest is quite extreme to the top right side. This simply means that when compared historically, that the managed money side is at the moment quite extremely engaged when it comes to their short open interest. So they hold quite a lot compared historically short open interest, which is definitely interesting for us. Because in that case, we simply have to ask ourselves the question, if already all of the trading institutions are already short engaged, which trading institution is supposed to go short in that case? Our speculation in that case is, so to say, that already all of the trading institutions are engaged when it comes to the short trend that we have been seeing in the ZM market for quite some time now. So roughly since 2023, when then we had another abrupt surge, but then from November 23 all the way to now in August, we have seen a short trend in the soybean meal future. Obviously, it could always happen that new CUT reports are published where we have new, even more extreme positions. So for example, this was once the most extreme position, whereas nowadays, one of those 4 points that we see right here are the new most extreme positions. But we can already see that these situations are quite interesting for us traders is when we have a look at our OBOS indicator, which relates this current position to other variables, which include the price, the amount of trading institutions involved, and the general open interest in the soybean meal future. And there we see this seems to work quite well. So we get these signals, then immediately the market crashes down. We get more signals, in this case long signals, the market goes up, and so on and so forth. And right now we already see quite a substantial amount of signals in the recent past. So we also got one in the newest CUT report, which was the 5th of August with 93% strength. Now, one might get the idea that we have seen quite a lot of signals in the recent past, and that therefore maybe these signals don't seem to work that well. But this is always why we cannot stress enough that the fundamental analysis only is one part of the equation, and that we need to complete it with another step, which is the second step, which is the chart analysis. So we always want to see a setup in the chart that confirms basically our idea that we got from the fundamental side, that now the market is basically validating our opinion that we formed from our fundamental analysis. But with this out of the way, I would say let's head over to our PMPU side, which is our commercial side. So basically all those trading institutions that are commercially involved with this market, basically producers, merchants, processors, and users. And in this case, we see an even more extreme position. So for the managed money side, it was already quite extreme, but now we can see that the long open interest is definitely at the most extreme point since basically forever. The short open interest, while still quite a lot of trading institutions are involved, it is somewhat in somewhere in this like relevant cloud. So this is not as interesting for us as the long open interest, because there we can see, as I mentioned before, that it's quite extremely high, and this simply tells us that the PMPU side is buying extremely much. This is a perfect indicator for us that they believe that the market is currently, well, quite cheap, and that they use these low prices to basically buy as much of this good as possible. And that is already like somewhat logical, because what we see here in the absolute price is that we are at quite a low price, which we saw only before in 2016. So this is like a very substantial low that we should really focus on, and that the PMPU side is also using to really buy this this good on a large scale. And so it's also not surprising that we get even more long signals from the PMPU side. If I can hover over it, last week was 100%, and this week it's also 100%. So this is definitely quite an extreme position that we see in the market, even when we relate it to these other variables that I mentioned earlier. Now for the open interest, this is somewhat interesting, because if we see an ongoing trend and we see that the open interest follows, that usually means that this trend is momentarily still accepted, and that we might have to wait for a while until the market then eventually reverses. So this simply means for us that we might have to be a bit patient until we see a good chart setup that is leading us towards a long trade. But at the very least, the open interest is quite high at the moment, which is going to be very beneficial for us when we want to enter a trade and when we also want to exit a trade. So we have a good liquidity, and therefore also good spreads, and so on and so forth. Next up, our Flowcube. It's not that interesting at the moment. It's only telling us that we get some strong short covering at the moment. So that simply means that from like a more short-term perspective, that momentarily the short trend seems to be slowing down a bit, and that short positions are covered in the market. So they are flattened out basically. For the seasonals, this is now the first thing that is not that beneficial for a short trade, because what we see here is that until the 1st of September, we have an ongoing short seasonality. But from what we've already talked about, that we might have to be patient for a trade anyways, this might not even be as bad, because afterwards there is a long seasonality coming up, or a long season from the 1st of September until even all the way to the 9th of March. So there's a very long and also very powerful 90 long seasonality coming up that might even boost our trade when the long setup in the chart is not happening tomorrow or the next day, but instead like maybe in 2 or 3 weeks. And this is the perfect condition for us, that we also have the long season boosting our trade win chance. And lastly, looking at the term structure, we can already see that this is in its normal state in contango. So the future contracts that are further into the future become more pricey. This is how it should be, primarily because of storage costs. And one very powerful effect in the term structure is that it shifts. Once it shifts and the future contracts that are further into the future become actually cheaper than the future contracts that are closer to expiry, that we usually see a very strong and abrupt surge in price, which would even boost our long trade. But we don't see this at the moment because our difference indicator basically tells us that nothing is happening at this point. But for our users for this software, definitely keep an eye on the difference indicator. If we get some long signals in ZM, that will boost our trade even more. But even without signals, this is already quite an interesting situation fundamentally that we have in ZM, which makes the market interesting for a long trade as soon as we get a nice setup in our chart. And I would say this will conclude our video for this time. Therefore, I hope there were one or two information that were also beneficial for your trading. If you have any recommendations or questions, please feel free to drop us a comment and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And with that, I thank you very much for watching and hopefully see you again next time.